कैंडी हाउस के अंदर हमारी क्रिसमस पार्टी। आज की पार्टी की सारी डेकोरेशंस हो गई हैं।
वाह, ये तो कैंडी हाउस है ना?
मुझे भी बिल्कुल इसी तरह का घर चाहिए। हाउस ऑफ कैंडी कंस्ट्रक्शन मशीन। पहले हमें अलग अलग चीजें डालनी होंगी
और बटर
और शक्कर, और फिर डालेंगे वनीला एसेंस। और अब स्विच ऑन हो गया। टेस्टी लग रहा है। चॉकलेट।
ये तो सच में चॉकलेट है।
ठीक है, चलो अभी बनाना शुरू करते हैं।
सबसे पहले स्पॉन्ज केक,
कुकीज,
वेफर्स, छत पे। ठीक है, चलो अंदर और भी कमरे बनाते हैं। कैंडी।
वो असली चूहा नहीं था, बल्कि बस चिरी चिरी का एक फेवरेट खिलौना था।
ये खुल नहीं रहा है। नोबिता, वो शायद चाबी है।
अरे नहीं, दरवाजा ऐसे नहीं खुल रहा है।
मुझे माफ करना, मैं तो बस कैंडी टेस्ट कर रहा था।
फिक्र मत करो, मेरे पास गैजेट्स है। अरे नहीं, क्यों ना हम फिर से इसकी मदद से एक और चाबी बना लें।
अरे हाँ।
शायद इसकी फिलिंग खत्म हो गई है।
अरे नहीं।
चलो हम चिरी चिरी से स्मॉल लाइट का बटन दबाने के लिए कहते हैं।
मैं बिल्ली पर भरोसा नहीं कर सकता। मैं खुद यहाँ एक छेद करता हूँ।
मैं मदद करता हूँ।
मैं भी।
अरे नहीं, मेरा पेट भर गया।
मेरा भी भर गया है।
तुम में से किसी को गर्मी नहीं हो रही क्या?
मुसीबत हो गई।
हमें जल्दी बाहर जाना होगा।
इस तरह तो ये पूरा घर धीरे धीरे टूट जाएगा।
ये काम तुम मुझ पर छोड़ दो। मैं बाहर आ गई।
मैं इसे फ्रिज के अंदर रख देती हूँ।
फ्रिज के अंदर? ये कैंडी हाउस कहाँ चला गया? ये क्या? ये लो। क्रिसमस वाले दिन पर ज्यादा बर्फ।
ठीक है, अब हो गया।
ये तो सच में बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है।
तुम्हें नहीं लगता अगर कल सब कुछ बर्फ से ढका हुआ हो तो कितना अच्छा लगेगा?
अगर बर्फ पड़ी तो चमत्कार होगा।
सही कहा तुमने।
ठीक है, कल मिलते हैं।
ठीक है।
मुझे कोई ऐसा गैजेट दो जिससे मैं व्हाइट क्रिसमस के चमत्कार का एहसास कर सकूं।
अगर इतना कह ही रहे हो तो वेदर बॉक्स। अरे नहीं, ये तो खराब हो गया। पर मैं कुछ नहीं कर सकता नोबिता।
ठीक है, अब मुझे ही कुछ करना होगा। ठीक हो जा, ठीक हो जा, ठीक हो जा। कितनी सारी बर्फ जमा हुई है। अरे वाह। हेलो, मेरी दी गई बर्फ से तुम लोग बहुत खुश नजर आ रहे हो।
तो चलो हम सब नोबिता की बर्फ उसे वापस करते हैं। ये लो, ये लो, ये लो, ये लो। अब तुम अपनी बर्फ वापस घर ले जाओ।
नोबिता, मैं आ गई। क्रिसमस के दिन में सच में असली चमत्कार हो गया।
ये तो बिल्कुल अच्छा नहीं हुआ डोरेमोन।
पर चलो बर्फ में खेलते हैं। ये
भी ये गलत है। बर्फ रुक जाओ। रुको रुको रुको। रुक जाओ, रुक जाओ। ये तो बढ़ती जा रही है। डोरेमोन, लगता है ज्यादा बर्फ गिरने की वजह से सब घर चले गए।
बर्फ की वजह से बाइक स्टार्ट नहीं हो रही थी।
माफ कीजिएगा, ये सारी मेरी गलती है।
बर्फ की वजह से ट्रेन्स बंद हो गई हैं, तो शायद आज तुम्हारे डैड घर नहीं आएंगे।
हे नोबिता, अच्छा काम कर रहे हो। इसे क्या हुआ है?
पता नहीं, आज की पार्टी में देर मत करना। हाँ,
आखिर मुझे तुम्हारी विश जो पूरी करनी थी।
मैंने तुमसे बर्फ मांगी थी, तो इसकी जिम्मेदारी मेरी भी हुई ना। हम अपनी पूरी कोशिश करेंगे। नोबिता, तुम दोनों यहाँ क्या कर रहे हो? मैं मीचान को उसका क्रिसमस गिफ्ट देने गया था। तुम हमेशा मेरी बात नहीं मानते हो और फिर कोई गलती कर देते हो। ये मशीन तो शुरुआत से ही पूरी खराब थी। मतलब बाहर जो बर्फ पड़ रही है वो तुम्हारी वजह से नहीं पड़ रही थी नोबिता। इसका मतलब ये बर्फ तो वाकई चमत्कारी बर्फ निकली।
Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we explore a story that appears personal on the surface, but speaks to something larger happening across societies, especially in regions shaped by conflict, displacement, and generations of economic strain. The title of this episode is built around a moment at a graduation ceremony, a moment that should have represented achievement and community. Instead, it captured isolation, the line, "Ladies and gentlemen," a graduation with 0 guests, was spoken by an uncle while filming a student standing alone in an empty venue. That moment serves as our entry point into a deeper conversation about the evolving meaning of support, recognition, and belonging in times of social pressure, fractured families, and global instability. When we talk about education, we often celebrate the idea that academic milestones represent hope, progress, and opportunity. Across the world, graduation ceremonies have historically held symbolic weight beyond certificates and photographs. They show a family's investment and a community's resilience. But what happens when someone reaches that milestone without anyone present to witness it? What does it reveal about social divides, economic inequality, and the psychological consequences of conflict, migration, generational trauma, and institutional neglect? Today's story allows us to unpack these questions. It is not only about one student standing alone while being filmed by an uncle. It reflects patterns observed globally, especially in areas where instability influences family structures, mobility, expectations, and access to emotional support. As we move through this analysis, we will balance personal insight with broader historical context, examining why moments like this are becoming more common and what they reveal about changing global realities. The story begins with a quiet stadium, rows of chairs lined up with precision, a small stage decorated with banners, a sound system echoing lightly in the background. It is a setting that most people associate with crowded gatherings, proud parents, and the sound of applause. But on this day, the stands were empty, no cheering crowds, no handmade posters, no cluster of relatives waiting with flowers. Just one young person standing in formal clothing, holding a diploma envelope, while someone recorded the scene on a phone. The uncle's voice, half joking and half surprised, captured the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, a graduation with 0 guests." It carried a tone that blended sarcasm with disbelief, but beneath that tone lay a long, complicated history, not only within the family, but within the region, the economy, and the global forces that shape the way communities function today. As we unravel this moment, we need to understand the forces that might lead to such an outcome. Economic instability, conflict, driven displacement, generational expectations, and the shifting structures of extended families all play a role. Many regions around the world experience consistent waves of migration, internal or cross-border. This movement disrupts the traditional support systems that once defined major life events. Families become scattered, communication becomes strained, physical presence becomes inconsistent. In some regions recovering from conflict, Adults work multiple jobs to maintain financial stability. Ceremonies clash with unpredictable work schedules. Travel is expensive. Communities once defined by collective participation now face logistical barriers that make attendance difficult. In other cases, social tensions within families become amplified by economic pressure. Disagreements escalate into long-term distance. Achievements, even major ones, may no longer feel like shared family victories. The student in this scenario understood much of this. The weeks leading up to the graduation were filled with uncertainty. Messages sent to relatives went unanswered. Promises made in passing never solidified into firm commitments. The student had hoped that at least a few relatives would appear. A mother, a father, a sibling, a friend. But the stadium remained quiet. Standing alone in a public milestone can create conflicting emotions. Pride in one's achievement mixes with the sting of absence. A sense of accomplishment coexists with a sense of abandonment. For many young people, especially those in regions affected by conflict or economic hardship, this experience is more common than it appears. The feeling is not unique. It is part of a broader societal pattern. To understand the gravity of this moment, we need to examine the cultural significance of educational celebrations around the world. In East Asia, graduations often symbolize family honor and long-term plans for stability. In parts of Africa and the Middle East, graduations represent resilience amid limited access to education, especially in areas touched by conflict. In Europe and North America, they often mark independence and the transition into adulthood. In South Asia, they are tied to family reputation and multigenerational aspirations. Yet across all these regions, one trend is emerging: the rise of solitary achievements. More students are completing major milestones without the surrounding support that earlier generations considered normal. This shift is influenced by several global trends. Urban migration separates families. Economic pressures force people to prioritize survival over celebration. Political unrest disrupts mobility. Pandemic recovery continues to influence social gatherings. And digital culture has altered the meaning of presence, replacing physical attendance with messages, posts, and virtual interactions. Returning to our story, we look at the uncle who filmed the moment. His decision to record it created an unexpected contrast. On one hand, he provided a form of presence. On the other, he highlighted the emptiness of the setting with his words. His tone raises important questions about how society perceives milestones when they do not align with traditional expectations. His comment reflects a mix of humor, disbelief, and possibly discomfort. The student looked around at the empty seats and felt a familiar quiet settle in. Not a quiet produced by peace, but a quiet shaped by long-term emotional absence. Many viewers hearing this moment may relate to similar experiences. Birthdays without family, achievements unnoticed, or successes celebrated alone. These patterns, while personal, intersect with wider global issues. Isolation does not appear randomly. It grows from structural forces: economic hardship, social fragmentation, conflict displacement, shifts in community cohesion, and generational disconnection. As we analyze this moment, it is important to observe it through humanitarian and psychological lenses. Loneliness is not a new phenomenon, but global reports indicate that feelings of isolation are increasing across age groups. Young adults are especially affected. Studies in multiple regions show that milestones achieved without acknowledgement often lead to long-term emotional consequences. Not necessarily trauma in the clinical sense, but a deep sense of being unseen or unsupported. Yet, moments like this also spark important transformations. Many individuals who experience solitary achievements develop a different kind of resilience. They build self-reliance, emotional independence, and clarity about their goals. They learn to measure success internally rather than externally. This is not an ideal path, but it is a realistic one in a world where traditional family structures are shifting. Returning to the graduation, the student decided to walk across the stage even without an audience. The staff handed over the diploma with polite formality. The photographer offered the standard congratulations. The stadium speakers repeated the usual ceremonial phrases, but there were no cheers when the student's name echoed through the space, only the soft clicking of the uncle's phone. When moments like this circulate online, they resonate with millions because they reflect universal themes. They highlight changing family dynamics. They reveal the emotional cost of economic hardship. They expose how societies often overlook young people's struggles. And they remind us that public achievements do not always match private realities. Moving deeper into analysis, we must understand how conflict and instability reshape family roles. In many regions affected by war or civil unrest, families endure years of disruption. Some members relocate for safety. Others remain behind to maintain homes or property. Physical separation leads to emotional separation. The concept of attending celebrations becomes secondary to survival. For some families, the idea of supporting a graduation becomes a privilege rather than a routine expectation. In areas facing economic stress, families may carry significant financial burdens. Some parents work abroad, sending money home while missing major events. Some students support themselves entirely through part-time work or scholarships. The absence at ceremonies does not always represent neglect. It sometimes reflects circumstances beyond individual control. But for the student standing alone, the emotional impact remains the same. This moment also reflects a growing global conversation about the role of community support. Many young people today rely more on friends, mentors, or peers than on family. Digital communities have become new forms of belonging. Yet even these cannot replace the feeling of physical presence at a major milestone. The student in our story later reflected on the day with mixed emotions. There was pride in completing the degree, there was disappointment in the empty seats, and there was a lingering sense of distance from the family who should have been there. But this reflection also gave way to broader insight. The student began to recognize that achievements matter regardless of the size of the audience. Recognition does not always come at the moment of accomplishment. Sometimes it emerges later, through opportunities created by the achievement itself. From a geopolitical perspective, stories like this remind us that conflict's impact extends far beyond borders, violence, or policy. It affects education, family cohesion, mental health, and long-term generational stability. When young people reach milestones without support, societies lose an opportunity to reinforce communal strength. Ceremonies, even simple ones, help rebuild bonds after periods of instability. Their absence reveals deeper fractures. As we examine global data on educational participation in post-conflict regions, patterns emerge. Students continue to persevere even in uncertain environments. Graduation rates in some recovering areas remain surprisingly strong, a sign of resilience. But the social frameworks surrounding education weaken. Families strained by years of instability struggle to provide the traditional support expected at major life events. International organizations often highlight education as a stabilizing force. It provides structure, opportunity, and hope. But emotional support systems are equally important to sustain long-term success. The student in this story embodies that tension, a milestone achieved, a celebration missing. As the uncle continued recording, he attempted to lighten the mood. He made a few more comments, trying to bring humor into the situation. The student smiled politely, aware that the moment was being preserved on camera. But beneath that smile was a quiet recognition that adulthood sometimes begins not with celebration, but with understanding. Understanding that life does not always offer the ideal moment. Understanding that success can be quiet. Understanding that recognition may come later. After the ceremony, the student walked through the empty parking lot. The uncle offered a ride home. There were no family gatherings waiting, no dinner plans, no celebration. Some viewers may relate to this. Many milestones pass quietly for people who live between economic hardship, displacement, or generational distance. The absence becomes part of the story, but the student made an important choice. Instead of viewing the day as a failure, they viewed it as a turning point. Achievements without acknowledgement still count. They still open doors. They still create opportunities. They still demonstrate capability and perseverance. As viewers, when we look at moments like this, we learn something about human resilience. We also learn something about global shifts. Individual stories reflect larger patterns. Families are changing. Societies are changing. Communities impacted by conflict or instability carry long-term emotional consequences that shape how people experience success. The question that emerges from this story is simple but profound. How do we ensure that young people feel supported even when traditional structures fail them? This question cannot be answered with a single solution. It requires collective effort across communities, institutions, and global networks. The story of the empty graduation is more than a personal disappointment. It is a reflection of widespread challenges. But it is also a reminder that individuals continue to move forward even when recognition is absent. This quiet resilience is one of the most powerful forces shaping the future. As we conclude this episode, remember that support does not always come from expected places. Sometimes it comes from a teacher, a friend, a colleague, or even from within. And sometimes a moment that appears lonely becomes the foundation for long-term strength. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay thoughtful, and continue exploring the global stories that shape our world. We will see you in the next episode.